new ways through the life and work of Gandhi. But Gandhi put me in touch with Jesus in a new and vital and important way that changed my life and future ministry. Early in my PhD program in New Orleans, I became fascinated by the young Martin Luther King Jr., born on January the 15th, 1968, which made him only 6 years older than I am. I saw how deeply he was influenced by Gandhi, and how both Gandhi and King were influenced by the Hebrew prophets and by Jesus. I visited with Dr. King and his wife, Coretta Scott King, on several occasions in their home in Atlanta and in his church office. And he shared with me a dream that I'd already seen in his speeches and in his civil rights activities. He was kind enough to help me define and redefine my proposal for my PhD work on his and Gandhi's use of civil disobedience as a technique to initiate social change. And that inspired me to make social justice a vital part of my life's work. On one of our visits, I saw that Martin Luther King needed to talk because he felt bad about a pastor in Chapel Hill. He had been invited to preach in his church, and because of that, there was all kind of uproar in the church, and it looked like the pastor would lose his ministry there. He felt very sad because many had identified with him and risked working with him, and now their lives were in jeopardy, and he didn't always know about it, and he didn't have time to reach out to all of them. I felt his anguish at being called an extremist, for by disposition he was anything but that. In his series of marches and other activities that challenged Jim Crow laws and the segregated status quo, hundreds were arrested and others were killed because they took part in his work. Later, many of his friends in the civil rights movement itself criticized him because he spoke out strongly against the Vietnam War. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King wrote, and I quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And in that letter, written in jail, which sounds like one of St. Paul's jail letters, Dr. King put in perspective his understanding of extremism. He said, "For Amos was an extremist for justice, Jesus an extremist for love, John the Baptist an extremist for repentance, Martin Luther an extremist for religious freedom, and Thomas Jefferson an extremist for the belief that all are created equal." Now, some of you in previous sermons have heard me speak about a good little church in Bogalusa, Louisiana, that allowed me to work on my PhD while being their pastor. Now, if you know Bogalusa, it's a Ku Klux Klan town then and now. And that city tested my convictions on nonviolence and certainly my commitment to act and speak out in the face of grave injustice. By the way, one of my strong colleagues in the struggle in Bogalusa was grandpa to our own Heather Lane Talley. Heather, are you here? There you are. Her grandpa, Bascom Talley, was a wise and courageous man with deep roots in the South. But he was committed to social change and to justice for all people. With 4 other leaders in our community, we did some small but important things to open up dialogue between blacks and whites in Bogalusa and to create opportunities to work together. We often saw a Klansman robed on the streets, Main Street of Bogalusa, intimidating blacks and anyone else who dared to challenge the status quo. Crosses were burned on some of our yards. Great damage to my car was done. Klansmen called my house 2 or 3 times a night for about 7 months, just to make sure I didn't sleep well. I began to filter much of what I was seeing through Dr. King's words. He said, our world is a neighborhood. We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish as fools. For insist that nothing will be done until people put their bodies and souls into this. Now, Bogalusa was a paper mill town, and it smelled like it. And there was really no real wealth in the town, but the difference between the wealth of the white community and the black community was staggering. And I could hear Dr. King saying, any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of people and is not concerned with the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is dry as dust religion. When the Ku Klux Klan acted against our church and against me, members gave me a pistol. I'd never owned one. I didn't know how to load it, and by the way, I never learned how to load it. I looked at that pistol and began to think about my own values and to filter them through Dr. King's words. He said, the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. And I remember the liberation I felt when I went to the river and threw that pistol as far as I could. It would be an understatement to say that Martin Luther King Jr. has not been one of the most instructive and influential people in my life. After completing my PhD, I moved to Tacoma Park Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., right near Walter Reed, where we added in my 12 years some 600 African American members to that congregation. It was in that congregation in 1967 and 1968 that I blessed same-sex couples on 2 occasions, 1968. While there, Dr. King was killed and the city burned for days. And our church was one place that hope flourished, and blacks and whites came together to rebuild trust in our shattered city. Toward the end of my ministry, I moved to another exciting church in downtown Hartford, Connecticut, Central Baptist Church, a church that has no racial majority and does parts of every worship service in 5 different languages: English, Vietnamese, French for our Haitian members, Spanish, and Karen for the Burmese people. Being a welcoming and affirming church, an open and affirming church, was important to that downtown church with a history of justice ministry going back to 1790. Through those churches, the Council of Churches in Rhode Island, and 2 university congregations in Madison, Wisconsin, and Baltimore, Maryland, the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me and motivated me to call for the very best in those churches and those communities. And by the way, I won't charge you for this. In Madison, for 8 years, I served on the committee that put together the citywide Martin Luther King celebration. And Garrison Keillor's brother, who was a character himself, was also on that committee. We know it was not easy to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. And that was not made easier by the imperfections in his humanity that have become clear in retrospect. Some of his admirers were shocked and dismayed to discover that he did not properly document research from another student's dissertation in his own PhD